Dear Mr. Koizumi, Ichiro Hatta met me at Tokyo Station when I came here at the end of July, intending to stay for a fortnight. He invited me to stay at his home instead of going to an hotel, and when the time came for me to return to Kobe, his father persuaded me to get rid of my house and make my home with him. So I've been adopted and am now one of the family, and they seem to want me to stay with them as long as I can. I had intended to return to London before Christmas, but I'm writing to my husband Robin to ask if I can stay longer, till after the cherry blossom. I make such slow progress in the language, not to mention Judo, that I feel I must stay a little longer if possible. Last night Ichiro and I had dinner with the famous Mr. Kyuzo Mifune. I practiced with him once at the Kodokan, and often sit and watch him. He's extraordinary. Very frail and delicate, very small, and looks quite old. He was in a playful mood when I practiced with him. He just threw me round the room as if I were an Indian rubber ball, and when I tried any throw, he simply wasn't there any longer. He has now agreed to teach me by myself on one morning every week, as I can practice with him every day when he's teaching in different places. In this way, I shall have to track him down to a different dojo every day, but it is worth it. In the afternoons, I practice with Ichiro and some of his many friends. People don't seem to mind being seen with no clothes on. At one hot spring, there was a private bathroom intended for honeymoon couples. To everyone's amusement, I insisted on having it, but there was no lock to the door, and no sooner was I ready to get into the bath than a man came in and insisted on washing my back. I didn't know enough Japanese to argue, and I'm quite used to the Japanese by now, but I must confess I was surprised next day when Ichiro told me he thought my bathing dress was indecent because it's cut low at the back. Mr. Hatta has chosen Japanese clothes for me for the autumn. Mr. Hatta always likes me to wear them, and even wants me to go out in the street in them. So far I've worn a thick kimono with a narrow obi, but the old gentlemen think this is all wrong. The new clothes have just arrived. The wide obi is very beautiful, but it looks beastly uncomfortable. With it are innumerable bells, bands, and various gadgets to hold it up. Also, there's the strangest underwear. One thing is certain, that is that I shall never be able to dress myself. The Japanese women at the Kodokan certainly have a very nice dojo, but if I couldn't do judo in any other place, I'm afraid I shouldn't do much. The girls are altogether too polite to each other. They never try to avoid any throw, but just take it in turns to drop each other gently on the mat. Mr. Mifune told Ichiro that if I could stay here till the spring, he could make me quite strong. Please give my love to your family and my best regards to everyone I know. Ichiro has been intending to write to you for a long while, but he's terribly busy. A team of wrestlers from Hawaii are here for a contest, and he has to arrange everything, entertain them, and fix business details and advertising, as well as coaching his own boys. So he'll write to you later. Professor Jigoro Kano is just back from a trip to Europe, but not well, as he has a stone in the kidney. People don't seem to think he'll live much longer. Remember me to Mr. Tani. Dear Mr. Koizumi, as you see, I'm still staying with Ichiro Hatta's family, and Ichiro says that he will write a letter for me to enclose with this. He's been very busy till now with the Hawaii wrestlers, but he'll tell you all about them and the Japanese success himself. He went to Osaka for the second match and chose the day of the Typhoon to travel on. The railway was greatly disorganized and we had to change several times. We arrived very late and deposited our boys and the Hawaiians with the parents of one of the party. There were about 18 of them, and when we found the house it was half down and the front wall in ruins. However, the hostess came to the door with a candle and took them all in, and Ichiro and another boy and I went to search for food for them and a hotel for me. There was no water to be had and very little food, and the lights had all gone out, but we managed somehow. Next day, we were more able to see the extent of the damage, and Osaka looked as if there'd been an air raid on the previous night. You'll have read all about it in the papers, so there's no need for me to tell you any more. The terrible toll of schools was the most tragic feature of the disaster. Last week I met Professor Kano for the first time. I'd expected to meet a very aloof person, for everyone seems to stand in such awe of him, but I felt quite nervous. Instead, I found a charming old gentleman with European manners who greeted me warmly and made me feel quite at home. He seems most anxious to help me, and asked me whether I only wished to get some practice, or whether I wanted to learn as much about the real meaning of judo as was possible in a short time. I told him that I was as much interested in the philosophical side as in the actual practice, which seemed to please him, and he asked me to come again when he'd had time to formulate a plan for my study. I saw him again the day before yesterday, and he advised me to practice whenever I liked with Mr. Mifune and Shiro, or with anyone who held a high degree in judo. At the same time, he insisted upon the importance of learning kata in all its forms thoroughly. For the rest, he said that he would talk to me often and explain the ethical side and answer any questions that might occur to me. Ichiro is very keen to come to England for 6 months when I go back. Do you think there's any chance of getting him any kind of job or managing it in any way? I shall be able to stay here till the end of May or thereabouts, arriving in England at about the end of June. I expect that Ichiro will come with me if Mr. Hatta consents, and he hopes to stay for a year. If the Budokai can find enough for his board and lodging, I can manage his fares and pocket money, but he'll write to you himself. I think it would be an excellent thing for the club if he does come to England, especially if you're too busy to give as much of your time as you used to do. A few days ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Kodokan. One of the imperial princes was present, and the emperor sent a present of money. A speech was read from the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Education delivered a long oration. All the famous judo men were there, and there was a rather touching scene when Mr. Yamashita, the oldest pupil, came forward. He's lost his voice with advancing years, and another man had to read his speech for him, but as he stood facing Professor Kano, I could not help thinking of the long years that these two men, now so old, had struggled to make judo popular, and what a wonderful day it must be to them to have lived to see such an amazing achievement. Professor Hajime Isogai came from Kyoto and came to lunch with me at the Imperial Hotel. I'd invited 2 6th Dan men who had been very hospitable to me, but Professor Isogai and Professor Isoka joined us. We had a very merry party, in the course of which Professor Isogai drank several cocktails and plenty of sake. I will say that for a man who's never tasted a cocktail before, he carried it remarkably well. It's true that he offered me a 5th degree if I would go to Kyoto, but otherwise he was quite himself. He broke his leg a short while ago, and arrived leaning heavily on a stick, but he left the hotel waving it in the air. When I remember how terrified I was of him in Kyoto, I can't help laughing. As for Professor Isoka, I've never been able to take him seriously since I taught in the Charleston. As I'm staying for another 6 months, Ichiro has given me his room, which is larger than the one I had before, and I've brought some furniture. I'm happy enough sitting on the floor in the ordinary way, but when I feel tired, I require something more luxurious than a mat. I got an armchair and a desk and an electric fire, for the hibachi is cold comfort in the winter. Mr. Hatta and Ichiro already wear so many clothes in the house that they look like Laplanders, but I cannot burden myself in this way. Neither can I bring myself to accept their kind offer to lend me some of their underclothing, long pants which extend to the ankle. I've quite a collection of Japanese clothes now, enough to keep me in dressing gowns for many a long year, including a rather lovely ceremonial dress that I had to get for the wedding of Mrs. Hatta's brother, which takes place next month. Ichiro is very keen on writing a book on judo in English. It's not a bad idea, as there's no good one in existence, except a very old one which is out of date. Ichiro is bringing 3 other boys with him. They're going to wrestle in Berlin in preparation for the Olympic Games next year, and will stay in Europe for a month. Ichiro, of course, wants to stay much longer and hopes to be able to remain for a year and return with the Olympic team in 1936. As he is hopeless at arranging his financial affairs, I propose to deposit money with you for his pocket money and ask you to be good enough to dole it out to him once a week. Otherwise, as he's so good-natured, he'll give it all away and be stranded. I shall bring him over and pay his fare back as well, but please keep this to yourself, as if it should get to my husband's ears, he'll think I'm too rich, which would never do.
Ichiro Hatta, 1906 to 1983, was enrolled in judo at the Kodokan by his father, a naval captain, after he fell out with the teachers at his school. There the young man fell under the spell of Jigoro Kano and Koizumi Fune, and by 1929 Hatta was both ranked 4th dan in judo and a firm believer in self-discipline. In 1929, Hatta also toured the United States with a Waseda University judo team. In Seattle, the team competed with the University of Washington wrestlers, and while the Japanese team won the match, its members also learned holds nobody had taught them about, and several had been roundly trounced. As a result, Hatta believed that the American methods deserved greater study. Few Japanese agreed with him, since to judo purists, judo contained all the knowledge worth knowing. Hatta accused the judoka of living too much in the greenhouse and failing to make up their minds whether they were practicing a martial art or an Olympic sport. In 1931, he started Japan's first freestyle wrestling program at Waseda University. In 1932, he represented Japan in wrestling in the Olympic Games Los Angeles. And in 1936, he coached the Japanese wrestling team at the Olympics in Berlin. He encouraged both Japan and the United States to exchange teams in various age groups for competition and cultural enhancement. His efforts advanced wrestling in both countries. Ichiro Hatta, then president of the Japan Amateur Wrestling Association and director of Japan's 1952 Olympics Committee, visited London again in 1952 whilst on his way back from the Helsinki Games, where his wrestling team won Japan's only gold medal and a silver medal. Over 74 years, he attempted to bring nations of the world together in understanding through sports. He achieved 8th Dan black belt in Judo and Aikido, as well as a 7th Dan in Kendo. He also served as a senator in the Japanese Diet.